You're now listening to Sanity at the Movies. It's another of our Fatherhood Edition episodes. And we are joined today by Jeff Wright. Jeff does a podcast named the Pop Culture Coram Deo Podcast, reviewing movies and things like that with Dr. Jared Moore, who we already had on the show. He also does a podcast called Backwoods Belief. He is primarily, though, a pastor in Cookeville, Tennessee, a Midway Baptist Church, and he writes for Servants and Heralds, if people are familiar with that. I, of course, am Nathan, your humble and obedient host, and we've got Jake and Ben you're going to be hearing from as well, just like always. But let me just go ahead and get us to it. Once again, the context is a movie that a father should watch with his son. And Jeff had his own answer to that, which you'll hear us discuss. All right, we are here with Jeff Wright for another in our fatherhood series. And we've been sort of spontaneously doing this with all of our guests, Jeff, just to get our bearings. What is like a fantastic movie night with Jeff Wright? There's no wrong answer because your partner in crime, Jared, already said Predator was like his jam and what he liked to fall asleep to. So what is the perfect movie night for Jeff Wright?
Man, it'd be a horror movie. And so,
Okay.
Wow.
yeah, I watch a lot of horror, a lot of it, which is garbage, but because my appetite is so voracious. A lot of movie nights, my dear wife has to sit with me through what she calls another stupid horror movie.
What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
That's kind of a tough question. I actually thought about what would be my favorite movie answer. I'm going to go with Exorcism of Emily Rose in the horror genre. Love that movie.
Okay. I have actually never seen The Exorcism of Emily
Oh,
Rose.
Brother.
I've seen it. I'll be controversial and mean to our guest. I hate that movie. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry, Jeff. I'm really sorry.
And but
I'm
what's
not a
your
horror
wrong
movie guy,
opinion
but-
on that based on?
Ben has zero appetite for that kind of thing.
I have zero appetite. I like it at best spiced into other things that I do like. So not as a genre in its own right. But I think just the theme of I've seen the darkness and now I'm done fighting for the light because the darkness is too dark. I just found that super irritating and stupid.
I'm among Philistines.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man.
That gives us our bearings, and we've already had a nice controversial stat. We'll see if Ben wants to stab our guest in the back anymore. Always good to start the podcast.
Only in the front. Only in the front.
Yeah.
Stab you to your face.
Yeah, no, I always like to make sure that we start our podcast with something like that as quickly as possible. Okay, so Jeff, the question was, what movie would you pick for a father-son watch? Like, what is one movie that every father should watch with his son? And your answer was?
Ford versus Ferrari.
Ford versus Ferrari, a James Mangold joint, our new leader of not Harry Potter. Wow. I said our new,
Wow.
and then my brain finished it with Harry Potter. But the new fearless leader of the guy with the whip and the fedora.
Indiana Jones, we call him. That's
Indiana
his name,
Jones. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. So we'll have to spend at least a tiny bit of this podcast speculating about Indiana Jones based on what we know from Ford versus Ferrari. But why'd you pick this movie, Jeff? What do you like about this for a father-son watch?
So, gentlemen, I organized my delight in this movie under 3 headings because I wanted to give you something.
You're a Baptist
I
preacher.
He's a Baptist preacher, yes.
I didn't alliterate it, though, and there's no chicken casserole. First, there are good men, right? When I think about the question about things I want my sons to watch with me, this movie is built on good men. They're idealists. They're driven to complete a singular cause, and it creates not just a kind of virtue within them, but it raises them and helps them kind of transcend their historical moment. And so I appreciate that these guys are likable. They're not feminized. They're kind of throwback, unreconstructed males. And through just saying this hard thing needs to be done, we want to slay this dragon, we want to overcome this barrier, they are ennobled. And you see just sort of the goodness of men pursuing difficult tasks. The next kind of is related to it. There's this good cause that brings so much out of them. And I've already mentioned the camaraderie, but the thing that I think would cause a viewer to truly fall in love with the movie is the scene midway through the narrative where they get into a fist fight in the yard. And we just don't get to see things like that in movies where men who are friends, they're making common cause, they work through their frustrations with each other with an actual fist fight. But they do it, again, in the most delightful way. There's some real stuff to be worked through. But, there's that great scene, and I think I read or saw in a director's commentary that was ad-libbed. Matt Damon's character's looking for a weapon to use against his buddy, and he first grabs a can of green beans, I think, which would do some real damage. And instead of using it, he sets it on the ground and picks up a loaf of bread and starts, whacking his friend with it. And one of the things I want my kids to see, my sons to see in particular, is that sometimes guys are going to fight, but guys need to fight in a way that's consistent with the trouble that's in front of them. You might work through this with your friends this way, but you need to be self-controlled even in the midst of that. And then lastly, just sketching all this out, it has a truly evil man. I don't know where it came from. I heard it attributed to G.K. Chesterton, but I heard once upon a time that it's a truly evil story that doesn't have a truly evil character. And in this movie, the evil, I think, is very realistic for the kind of evil your sons are going to run into. He's a bureaucrat. If you've ever read Jayber Crow, he's the man across the desk. Or if you're a C.S. Lewis fan, he would work for NICE, in That Hideous Strength. And it's sort of this passive-aggressive, again, effeminate, manipulative evil that men actually kind of run into more often than they run into the classic 80s schoolyard bully who they're going to have to take down physically. And so these guys have to learn to press on. There's not really much we can do with this guy, so we need to just plow ahead. So there's 3 points and answer. Anything you want to do with that?
Well, what you have just described, I think, is what people in a derogatory fashion call a dad movie. I mean, this is like every John Wayne movie. The 3 quality, you have good men, a good cause, men working through. I mean, every John Wayne movie is going to have some scene where he has to beat the tar out of the guy that he likes. Now, I think he'd probably put the bread down and grab the green bean can, but that's just because people have cartoonish abilities to absorb pain in all John Wayne movies. And then there are usually in a John Wayne movie, they're the real bad guys that just have to be shot. But then, yes, there are like the officious bureaucats and the people standing in the way and that sort of thing. I mean, I think that's one of those things that people like about the original Die Hard movie. It's actually something I find a little bit annoying about the original Die Hard movie is that there's so much time spent with people showing up with bad ideas that don't trust John McClane. I just want to see him fight the terrorists, but instead it's like the CIA and the FBI and the cops and everybody. But I admit that is something that people respond to about a movie like that. So I think you've described like a really classical formula, something that, you used to get 10 of these back in the day that had these kinds of qualities.
I think that's part of my appreciation. It is such a kind of a retrograde movie in that sense. The kind of thing that maybe once upon a time I could pull out a stack of, in a year and say, hey guys, which ones of these do you want to watch? But this one came to us in a time where these kind of movies are verboten and you're just kind of surprised to see it showed up somewhere and it had the kind of talent attached to it that it did. Of course, I'm a low-key car guy, and so the fact that it was, expressed through high speed and whatnot didn't hurt anything. I guess the unique feature I'd point to, you're right that it's a dad movie, but the unique feature that I would point to, maybe that does set it apart a little bit, is that there's a real sense in which the bad guy wins. Ken Miles is denied this historic victory that is one of the few truly great accomplishments in motorsports that's available to him at that stage of his life. But he picks back up and keeps on going. And, the way the movie kind of finishes out, he gains a kind of immortality through that. So the bad guy took this temporal victory. Sometimes they do, but the man who gets back up and gets back in the arena has a meaningful route to overcoming even that. And so I kind of appreciate the long-term view it takes on history,
Yeah, it's nice. And I think, Ben, you were saying you were reading up on the history. Yeah. That's real, right? The Christian Bale having to pull back.
Yeah. Yeah, it's real. Apparently, what he said after the race is, I think I've been screwed, except that's not what he said. But then, apparently, this made me like this guy more, Ken Miles. As he was talking about it to an LA Times reporter, he said, hey, please be careful in how you report what I have said. I work for these people. They've been awfully good to me. It makes you like the guy.
Well, that sentiment's captured in the movie, right? He said, when he walks off with Shelby, you promised me a chance to race, not the victory or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
well, and that's the
apparently
character growth for him.
Real.
Because at the beginning, he's, I won't have anything to do with anything but winning. And by buying into the idea that there's these other goods that he should pursue as well, he's actually compromised. He loses his victory. But it's presented as growth. This is a guy who learns to subvert like that hardcore individualism, or at least subdue it and aim it at a greater good. That's growth for Ken Miles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It does have to be a historical timepiece, time capsule type of a movie in order to get that kind of masculinity on screen. And I guess that's just worth saying or worth pointing out.
Mm-hmm.
You can have that sort of thing, but you have to have it in the confines of a historical narrative where we are pointing out that this is the way that people were, and isn't that a thing?
Mm-hmm.
And at best, Mangold, or a director, presents it without comment. And I think that he does more than that, presents it with some nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
But even most narratives that are going to, we're going to interrogate the 50s or the 60s or the 40s, we're going to have to make some pretty overt comment on the toxicity of it all. And instead we just get a pretty fun action movie that made me pretty excited about Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll get to that because we can't end this podcast without that. Yeah, it does. I mean, I think when you look across James Mangold's career, because this is the man that did Walk the Line and Logan, and now he's doing geriatric
Girl
Indiana
Interrupted.
Jones. Girl Interrupted, yes. Well, that would be the exception. But he's a man who likes mid-century America. He's a man who likes to tell stories of men who are out of their time, he wants to look back, I think. And that can be, I think that's the strength of his work. This is one of the only movies by him that I really unabashedly love. Logan wasn't for me. I don't know. I didn't care. And I Walk the Line, I actively kind of dislike because I think it sells the story of Johnny Cash pretty short by leaving a little important part called the gospel out of it, which isn't, say what you will about Johnny Cash's faith, but Johnny Cash believed that Johnny Cash had faith. Like, it's part of the story. And so for them to just turn it into June Carter saved his life. I mean, of course, June Carter saved his life. Like, that's a big part of it, and that's the romance. And I wouldn't have it any other way, but you have to have Johnny Cash, the Christian, in order to say you're telling the story of Johnny Cash. And so I'd say this guy's batting average, for my money, isn't that great. But Ford versus Ferrari is a really strong movie that I was a little surprised by, actually. Like you guys were kind of saying, I kept waiting for it to take a bad direction or suddenly interrogate this whole manliness thing in a way that we wouldn't approve of. I kept waiting for the wife character to have some kind of a lame something, but she's good. She's just a good supportive wife character. And other than that, they don't feel the need to add a bunch of women characters just to have them, just for their bingo card.
Yeah, there's no kind of prodigy mechanic who retools the GT40 in a way that no man could see. I mentioned earlier that scene about them fighting, but maybe my second favorite scene in the movie is when Ken Miles has, the bureaucrat scores an early win and keeps Ken Miles off the first team to compete at Le Mans with a GT platform. And so he's at the shop listening to the race, just turning a wrench, I mean, that in and of itself, a classic kind of guy therapy scene. And she shows up and she turns the station to just a song, and they dance there together in the shop. And it's such a wonderful picture of a wife coming in a way to support a husband who's at a rough spot. But it's also such a classy view of how marriage can work in beautiful fact. I mean, I loved watching it with my sons to say, man, that's not all marriage is, but thanks be to God, that's some of what marriage is. And it's as wonderful as it looks right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Jake, what are your other thoughts on this film?
I don't have a lot of other thoughts. I really appreciated the action of it. And I remember the first time I saw this was on your recommendation, Nathan. And you were like, hey, this is just a solid movie. Two of the movies that we have reviewed in this series, I watched on your recommendation, just in hey, this is sort of surprisingly solid and enjoyable top to bottom, and a fun night at the movies, for you and Amanda or whatever, good action. So that's really it. And I was also, at the time, he I think this movie had secured him Indiana Jones. And so I was definitely watching it through that filter, and I liked the portrayal of masculinity and the action together, and thought, this guy might bring enough energy and excitement and freshness to Indiana Jones that it could actually be really great. Could be really fun.
Mm-hmm.
That's really it.
Hey, can I ask, you said this was the second in the series that he'd recommended that you'd really liked. What was the other one?
A Quiet Place was one that Nathan had recommended to me before that had come up. So
probably the two mainstream movies I've ever recommended to you. I mean,
yeah, that's right. That's why they stick out in my mind. I mean, I've seen a lot of movies that you've recommended, but these are the kind of mainstream movies that I would have passed on, would not have bothered with without a recommendation, I think. And that's why I think they stick out in my mind. Is it, it just sort of looked vanilla, just like A Quiet Place looked vanilla. And there's a sense in which you could argue that they both are kind of vanilla, but they're vanilla in a really fun, complete, well-told, enjoyable.
They're vanilla in a world without ice cream.
Right.
I mean, it's like, oh, yum, vanilla. I haven't had this flavor forever. This is great. Yeah,
ice cream is still made.
Ice cream is, people are still eating ice cream. People are still hungry for this. And I will say, Jeff, the two scenes that you're describing, the fight in the yard and the wife coming to him in the garage, are the two scenes that have stuck with me more than the racing, more than a lot of the other stuff in the movie. I forget who I was hearing some person talk, and they were saying, I was watching a TED Talk with either Lord or Miller, one of the two guys that did Spider-Verse and all that stuff. And he was saying when they made Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, originally it was about this guy working out the science behind the meatballs or something like that. And the producer came in and said, there has to be a relationship. There has to be a relationship. This has to be about people. And he said the big lesson that they learned, and then they made it like the guy's dad doesn't approve of him making cloudy meatballs or something. But they learned an important lesson, which is that movies and stories in general are never about ideas. They're always about relationships. And I think that is, you could argue with that as a 100% true statement. But I think that is the key to why a movie like this works. We're actually sort of all enjoying and feasting on the relationship between the two men more than we are the actual, will Ford beat Ferrari? I mean, who cares? Who cares, really? You care because it's an opportunity.
And you might have already known, you probably already knew, or you can look it up on Wikipedia anyway. That's never the point with a historical drama.
Yeah, exactly. And frankly, I am not a huge car guy insofar as I am a huge car guy. Ferrari. I mean, come on. I mean, I'm as patriotic as they come, but European cars are cooler than American muscle cars, I think. That might be blasphemy, Jeff.
I mean, even in this movie, again, the GT40 is this historically significant car, particularly in American racing. But when you're watching the movie, the Ferrari they're so beautiful. The aesthetics of the Ferrari leap off the screen at you. My sons, they're just to me like, Dad, look at those cars. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Yeah, exactly. And the greatest movie car of all time is the Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger, in my humble opinion. And it's a sleek, European car. Like, I'm sorry, Ford's never made anything that comes close to the beauty of like a classic Ferrari, in my humble opinion. So insofar as this is a movie about abstractions, I think the abstractions kind of don't work for me. But I don't care about Ford versus Ferrari. I'm not, one of the reasons I was trepidatious about approaching this movie before I'd seen it was I was just like, this is obviously going to be, from the trailers, like a dad movie, kind of a stick it to the man movie. But isn't Ford the man? Like, sure, they're working for the man.
Sure.
But then it turns out they actually do have to, stick it to that man too, because you've got, as you say, the Josh Lucas. That poor guy always plays the evil bureaucrat.
Yep, from Hulk till now.
Yes, he was the guy that wouldn't want to see the Hulk angry, and he did.
The Beebe family that he's playing a guy. I think it's Leon Beebe.
Yeah. Leo, maybe?
Leo, maybe, yeah. They were very upset about the movie. Of course, I'm not done the deep dive on this, but there's a great book on the same historical narrative, and it's called Go Like Hell. And everything in the book seems to indicate, that's who BB was. Those guys are out there, man, and you got to have a game plan. You got to anticipate them, and you got to have a game plan to deal with them. And maybe as the cosmos bends towards justice, us looking back and seeing them in a movie like this is one of the ways that just desserts are doled out.
Mm-hmm. I'm of two minds about it, because sometimes I'll watch a movie like this and I'll say, oh, well, they're obviously just writing Josh Lucas to be a jerk, just so that we can be happy when they, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say what I'm trying to say, when they get one over on him. And so that can be kind of annoying. But also, as you say, those people do exist. Some people just are bullies. Some people just are bureaucrats. You will encounter them. We've all encountered them in our lives, and they are just as awful as a movie like this, or a classic John Wayne movie where some guy's like, we don't want to stand up to the ranchers, John Wayne. Those people do exist. And so it is cathartic to deal with them. Did you, Ben, in your research, did you encounter anything else that you thought was interesting about the fact and or fiction of Ford versus Ferrari?
They hewed, in terms of the characters of the men, it looks like they hewed pretty close. And you got Henry Ford the second, pretty close. The VP, pretty close. Beebe, if that's how you pronounce his name. He didn't get locked in an office. Big shock. But yeah, like you're saying, Jeff, maybe that was who he was. I don't know. What the movie does is it does what good movies like this do. From what I could tell, it simplifies historical stuff so that it can portray it more accurately in terms of the essentials of like who these people were and the kinds of tensions they had. So I was like, oh, this is cool. Looks like they did a good job. That's mostly what I found. It just made me have a little more respect for what the movie had done.
Yeah. I think that is what a movie should do. The other thing I want to say about this movie is I love it when Christian Bale has an opportunity to do a fun character. He has such a run of stern, taciturn guys that don't talk kind of Batman characters. He did a couple Westerns like that and different things. But when he gets to be British and he gets to smile a little bit and have some energy and have some attitude, he's such a likable guy, and he doesn't get to tap into that likability very much, or not as much as he should.
I would say it's one of my favorite roles of his. He often doesn't get, he likes to play, or at least he's typecast. I think he must like it, but he'll play extremes, or he'll play characters that represent ideas more than characters who feel like people.
Right.
Looking at you, Bruce Wayne, looking at you, I don't know, any number of Bale roles. But this one is more like, oh, he's playing a person. It's fun.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the same thing with Colin Farrell as he embraces this stage of his career where he's the Penguin and all this kind of stuff. It's like, this guy's a pretty great character actor that has been trapped as a leading man for a decade or two. And he's just, Hugh Grant actually is a perfect example of this in Dungeons and Dragons and Paddington 2. It's like, he is having so much fun playing characters. And he was obviously so tired of being a leading man. And he's just so glad to have aged and gotten ugly and gotten out of that. And I think Christian Bale, same thing. Jeff, what kind of conversations would you have with your son based on this movie?
Well, the conversations that I have had, my oldest son really resonated with this movie. Is
how old?
13.
13?
Yeah, so
perfect.
Prime for the gearhead kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
We've touched on a lot of that already. Hey, it's a good thing to give yourself to a singular task, that I think I came of age in the Young, Restless, and Reform movement, and the noble Christian life was like sell everything and move to Africa. And, if you're not doing that, you're probably not radical enough. And I've since seen that like having a family, providing for them, trying to do well every, Monday through Friday to make sure they have what they need from you and from the world as you provided is a noble thing. And so the vision of Ken Miles, Ken kind of goes through this difficulty where he's really a singularly gifted racer, but he's not putting bread on the table that way. So he makes a decision to serve his family, ends up getting a corporate gig, and it works out. But I've talked to my sons about, hey, look, part of being a good man is just staying in the grind for what your family needs, showing them the beauty of home life. I mean, I talked about the scene of Dancing with the Wife. She's not a pushover. I wouldn't commend a young lady to get her husband's attention the way that plays out in that movie. A little risky. But those are the kind of dynamics you're going to find in a marriage, and you need to be prepared for both. And then lastly, what we said about the bureaucrat, like you're not often going to run into an actual dragon. You're going to run into some smarmy dude who wants to manipulate your boss to put you in a bad spot. And you better be prepared for that. And you can't whine about it. And you can't say, well, golly gee, he's got me on the rules. You got to just press on and keep going. If the Lord's going to be kind enough to vindicate you, he will. But your job is to just keep pressing on. And I mean, honestly, legitimately, we watch this movie quite a bit when my son gets to pick. And so I'm kind of glad they're kind of being catechized in that world. Thankful for that.
Any objections or warnings about this movie for people who haven't seen it?
I mean, there's some bad language. I don't mean to downplay that, but I'm sure there's some foul language. I can't think of anything that stands out, but I mean, in terms,
life has bad language.
Yeah. And I mean, again, for a mainstream movie, this is just a remarkably clean, without being sanitized movie. I'm thankful that it popped out. We get a lot of use out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Jake or Ben? Before I want to say Indiana Jones thoughts, but any thoughts before those?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, what do you guys want to predict about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny based on James Mangold and Ford versus Ferrari? Everyone has like a sheepish, sad smile on their face. So all three of you, nobody wants to predict anything good, I guess.
I'd rather predict something bad and be pleasantly surprised.
I mean, isn't the big question whether or not the rumors about the historic replacement are true? I mean, that kind of the whole movie hinges on whether that is what happens.
You mean whether Phoebe Waller-Bridge is actually going to go back in time and erase Indiana Jones and have all his adventures? I mean, yeah, that's what everybody's saying. And usually if you think Disney's going to do the stupidest thing, that's what they do.
They always do it.
But me and Jake have this conversation every time there's a big franchise movie. Jake's like, here's the absolutely garbage thing that someone with one brain cell would do. And so they're going to do it. And I'm like, yeah, but don't you think maybe there's someone with two brain cells? And Jake's like, no. And he's always been right. But
I refuse to think about this movie because I don't want to know. I don't want to figure it out the way that I have these other ones, and also be preemptively disappointed. I prefer to save my disappointment for the theater.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah,
postemptively.
I think there's a reason why I don't want to think about this one. So
it's just too awful to like. I mean, we've been living in a world that's too awful to believe for a long time. But
they're really going to erase Indiana Jones.
They're really going to erase Indiana Jones. Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future. We're like.
But what they'll do is they'll erase him and then they'll replant him as Han Solo in a galaxy far away.
Raise him from the dead.
No, it's all going to tie in together into the larger Star Wars canon now.
James Mangold made Ford versus Ferrari. He probably wants to make a good movie.
But Disney wasn't in charge of it.
I mean, you're back to the BB character now with him in real life. Like, you got this guy who wants to do something good, and he's got this towering corporate overlord monster, maybe making him a race.
And he's going to cave.
I know. I think he's going to take Bob Iger and get him in a.
He's going to be a team
car.
Player. No, he's going to be a team player and take the money.
No, he's going to drive Bob Iger really fast, and he's going to be like, "Oh, I see your point of view now, James Mangold." For some reason,
the magic of horsepower.
Oh my goodness,
horsepower. He's going to be driving in a truck with him, and then he's going to throw him out the front of the truck, and then Bob Iger is going to slide under the truck, and it's going to be great. Maybe they'll run from a boulder together, and then Bob Iger will be like, "All right, you can make a good Indiana Jones movie." I think
you answer directly. Answer directly to me from now on, Mangold.
Yes. So James Mangold, in other words, learned nothing from his own movie, and will. Superman on Laundry Day.
No, the thing he learned is to be content by being a team player and just be happy that he's able to go along and make an Indiana Jones movie. Not a great one, but he wasn't promised that. He was promised that he could make the movie.
Oh my God.
So that's the lesson that he taught us, and that's the lesson that he's going to learn. That's the lesson he's going to show. And then he's going to think that he can leverage that into making a truly great movie afterwards, and he's going to crash into a wall.
And blow
it's
up.
going to be over for
like
his
Star
career.
Wars Dawn of the Jedi.
Yep.
Telling you guys.
You have super depressed me, man. Like, super depressed me right there.
Hey, we're just, he's just using the structure of your favorite movie.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. It feels nice when it's my own weapon.
Maybe who's the Mr. Ferrari in this analogy? Is there someone that's going to give him a sage little nod as he hangs his head in shame walking out of...
Steven Spielberg.
Spielberg, yeah. There you go. No. I did read, I didn't do any research, but I did read that there was a race later where Ferrari pulled the same trick and had 3 Ferrari drivers place first, second, and third, and Ford didn't even place. So there's another depressing coda that they apparently left out of the movie.
Yeah, I'm super thankful they left that out. I did not know that, and honestly, I would like to go back 10 minutes ago when I didn't know that still.
I'm sorry. Mr. Ferrari had great respect for Carroll Shelby or whatever his name is, and he was just men nodding at each other. I like a good movie where men nod at each other. We don't get them anymore. All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. This has been fun.
Thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate what y'all are doing. Keep up the good work.
You do the same.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right. See you guys. Thanks again. Bye. Okay, everybody, thank you for listening. Thanks once again to Jeff Wright. And you can support our work at patreon.com/sanity at the movies. Be part of our Discord channel. Weigh in on what you want us to do and how you want us to do it. A good time will be had by all. Plus, we could really use your support to keep this podcast going. So give us a listen at patreon.com, or give us your support at patreon.com/sanity at the movies. Until next time. Vroom, vroom.